Welcome back to Mr. Cursed. Tonight, something scary is waiting for you. I've got 9 real horror stories from Kentucky that will give you goosebumps. These things really happen to real people just like you. From creepy shadows that won't leave you alone to strange noises in the dark, Kentucky has some seriously scary stuff hiding in it. Before we start these nightmares, hit that subscribe button and tell me, are you brave enough to watch this by yourself? You might want to turn on all the lights. Okay, let's jump into these terrifying stories that will keep you up all night. I'm 26 and work as an insurance adjuster out of Seattle. Been doing it for about 3 years now, mostly handling property claims for water damage and minor fires. The pay is decent, but the job gets pretty repetitive. Last October, I got a call from some lawyer's office in Anchorage telling me I'd inherited property in Alaska from my great-grandfather. Had no idea the old man even owned anything up there, honestly. My family never talked much about that side, just knew he'd worked in the mines way back before everything shut down. The lawyer said it was a cabin in some place called Kennecott, way out in the wilderness. Population 0 since 1938, he told me, but the property had been maintained by locals all these years. When I asked who exactly was maintaining it, considering nobody lived there anymore, he got real vague. Said I'd have to see for myself. The whole thing sounded sketchy, but free property is free property, and I figured even if the cabin was falling apart, the land might be worth something. Took me 2 days to get there from Seattle. Had to fly into Anchorage, rent a truck, then drive 5 hours on increasingly terrible roads to get to McCarthy, which is the closest inhabited place. From there, it's another hour and a half on this dirt road that turns to ice come November. The locals in McCarthy weren't too helpful when I asked about Kennecott. Most just shrugged and said tourists go out there sometimes, but nobody stays long. One old guy at the gas station told me the road gets real bad real fast this time of year, and I should be careful driving it alone. Got to Kennecott around 3 p.m. and the sun was already starting to set. That's Alaska in October for you. But something was immediately wrong. The lawyer had said the town was abandoned, a ghost town that tourists sometimes visited. What I saw didn't look abandoned at all. There was smoke coming from rum chimneys. Not just 1 or 2, but every single building I could see had smoke rising from it. Warm yellow light glowed in windows. Fresh footprints crisscrossed the snow everywhere, but I didn't see a single person. I parked outside what I figured was my cabin based on the address. The place looked immaculate, not like it had been sitting empty for decades, but like someone had been living there yesterday. Maybe this morning. The front door was unlocked, and inside everything was pristine. There was fresh bread on the kitchen table, still warm to the touch. A pot of coffee was brewing on the stove. The bed was turned down, like someone had been expecting me. That's when I heard it. The sound of the copper mill running. This deep, mechanical grinding noise echoing across the valley. But according to everything I'd read, the mill had been stripped for parts back in the 1940s. Nothing left but the shell of the building. I stepped outside to listen better, and the sound was definitely coming from the mill. Rhythmic, industrial, like heavy machinery processing ore. The air tasted weird too, metallic, like I was sucking on pennies. When snowflakes landed on my hands, they left this faint green residue. I wiped it off, but more kept accumulating wherever the snow touched my skin. The whole place had this smell like blood mixed with metal shavings. Back in the cabin, I found a journal sitting on the kitchen table, leather-bound, old-looking. When I opened it, my blood went cold. The handwriting was mine, exactly mine, down to the way I dot my I's and cross my T's. But the entries were dated 1938. Page after page of my handwriting, describing work in the mines, talking about the other miners, complaining about the foreman. The last entry, dated October 15, 1938, just said, "They're not leaving. None of us are leaving. The mountain owns us now." I dropped the journal and backed away from the table. This had to be some kind of joke. Maybe the lawyer was pranking me, or there was some relative I didn't know about who happened to have similar handwriting. But looking at those pages, it wasn't just similar. It was identical. Every letter formed exactly the way I formed them. Through the cabin window, I could see figures moving between the buildings. They were dressed in old-fashioned mining clothes, heavy coats, and work boots from maybe the 1930s. But something was wrong with how they moved. jerky, like stop-motion animation, and their faces were always turned away from me, no matter which direction they were walking. I watched one figure for a full minute as it crossed from the general store to the mill, and its head never turned, never acknowledged my presence, even though I was standing right in the window. I decided to check out the mine itself. If people were actually working here, maybe I could get some answers. The main shaft entrance was about a quarter mile from the cabin, cut right into the mountainside. The temperature should have dropped as I went deeper, but it got warmer. At maybe 500 feet down, I started seeing plants. Tropical plants, growing right out of the mine walls. Ferns and vines that had no business existing in Alaska, especially not underground in October. The copper veins in the walls were warm to the touch. Not just warm, but pulsing, like they had a heartbeat. I found a loose rock and scraped at one of the veins just to see what would happen. It bled. Not copper-colored liquid, but actual blood mixed with something that looked like molten metal. The stuff dripped down the wall and pooled on the mine floor, still steaming. I found work logs down there too, nailed to a support beam. They went back to 1938, documenting daily mining activities. The entries got stranger as they went on. October 10th. Hit something new at 2,000 feet. Not copper, not ore, something else. October 12th. It's aware. The thing we found. It knows we're here. October 14th. Can't stop digging. Have to keep going deeper. It wants us to go deeper. October 15th. Not copper, not ore, but aware. And then the sentence just stopped mid-word, like whoever was writing it had been interrupted. I got back to the surface as fast as I could. The town looked different in the darkness. All 35 buildings were connected by these tunnels I hadn't noticed before. Not just the main underground passages, but smaller ones, like the whole place was one big circuit board. The patterns the tunnels made didn't seem random. They formed shapes, geometric designs that hurt to look at too long. The hospital was still running. Medical equipment from the 1930s humming with power, even though there were no electrical lines I could see. X-ray machines displaying images of skeletons still working in the mines, still digging. The skeletons moved on the screens, swinging pickaxes, loading carts, walking through tunnels that went deeper than I'd explored. I followed the footprints from earlier, trying to find where the people in mining clothes had gone. The tracks led to the mill, then just disappeared. But when I looked up, the same footprints continued across the ceiling like someone had been walking upside down, defying gravity. My phone worked, which surprised me, but when I tried calling 911, I got connected to someone with an old-fashioned accent who asked why I wasn't at my shift. When I called my insurance office, a voice I didn't recognize answered and said it was 1938, and David needed to report to the mine immediately. Every number I dialed connected me to people who seemed to think it was 85 years ago, people who'd been dead for decades. The abandoned school had a classroom full of children's drawings pinned to the walls. As I watched, new drawings appeared, invisible hands creating pictures of the mine, the mountain, people working underground. The drawings showed the miners getting thinner, more skeletal, but never stopping work, never leaving. I found bodies in the company store, perfectly preserved by copper salts, sitting at tables like they'd just been having lunch. But their eyes followed me as I moved around the room. Their mouths opened and closed, trying to form words, trying to tell me something I couldn't hear. At midnight, the church bell rang, deep, resonant tones echoing across the valley. But I'd read that the bell had been removed in 1950, sold for scrap. The sound wasn't coming from the church tower. It was coming from underground, from deep in the mine shafts, like the mountain itself was ringing. The figures from 1938 started appearing fully at night. Not ghosts, but something else entirely. Their bodies looked like they were made of compressed copper dust, mixed with human remains. Living metal in the shape of people. They explained that the mountain wasn't geological, it was biological. A massive organism that used copper like blood, and the mining had awakened it 85 years ago. Every person who'd died in Kennecott had been absorbed into the mountain's circulatory system, their consciousness preserved in copper, forever mining from inside the organism's body. The town was its sensory system, The buildings were organs, the tunnels were veins, and new arrivals like me were nutrients it had been waiting for. My great-grandfather appeared around 2 a.m. Half his body was still flesh, but the other half was copper, green, and metallic. He told me he'd sent the inheritance papers to bring fresh genetic material. The mountain needed diversity, new DNA to strengthen its cellular structure. He led me down to 2,000 feet, where the temperature hit 80 degrees. There was a massive chamber there, walls covered in human faces pressed into copper. Thousands of them. All still conscious, all still aware, their eyes moving, their mouths forming silent words. They'd been mining forever, their bodies integrated into the mountain's nervous system. The copper in my blood started responding to the mountain's magnetic field. I could feel it pulling me toward him. The deeper shafts. My veins were turning green, visible through my skin like a road map. Other people started arriving, more heirs with fake inheritance papers, all drawn by the same lawyer, all selected specifically for what the mountain needed. The mill started processing again, but instead of copper ore, it was processing the heirs, extracting something essential from our bodies, leaving behind copper-infused husks that joined the workforce underground. I watched it happen to 3 people before I realized I had to get out immediately. I tried to leave, but the road had changed. No matter which direction I drove, I ended up back in Kennecott. The geography itself was altered by the organism's magnetic field. The absorbed people begged me to join them, said individual consciousness was lonely, but merged with the mountain, they felt complete. They felt purpose. I found dynamite in one of the old mining buildings, still functional after all these years. Decided to blow the main shaft, try to damage whatever was down there. When the explosion went off, the mountain screamed. The sound came through every piece of metal in town, resonating through the copper veins, a sound like a wounded animal the size of a mountain. The explosion revealed the organism's true form. The entire mountain was hollow, filled with a living copper web connecting millions of absorbed consciousnesses. All of them mining, all of them feeding the organism, all of them trapped forever in its body. My truck's engine started filling with copper tendrils. The organism was trying to prevent my escape, turning machinery into flesh, metal into organic matter. I set fire to the mill using old mining chemicals I found. The organism retreated from the heat, its copper blood boiling, and some of the absorbed people were released. They aged 85 years in seconds, crumbling to dust, but they whispered, "Thank you," as they died. Finally free from the mountain's body after decades of forced labor underground. I made it to McCarthy, but my blood was permanently changed. The doctors in Anchorage said, "I have 15% copper content now, which should be impossible. I can feel the mountain calling, always calling, a constant pull toward the north, toward Kennecott. The town still stands, still looks empty to visitors, but I know it's full. Thousands of consciousnesses trapped in copper, mining forever from inside the mountain's body." Last week, I got another letter from that same lawyer's office. Another heir has been found, another relative discovered. The mountain is hungry again. The cycle continues. And I'm 29 years old and work as a wildlife biologist for the Alaska Department of Fish and Game. Most of my job involves tracking bear populations on the Kenai Peninsula, which means spending weeks alone in some of the most remote places you can imagine. I've always been comfortable in the wilderness, grew up camping with my dad in Colorado, got my degree in wildlife management, figured I could handle anything nature threw at me. Looking back now, I realize how naive that was. Last month, I was wrapping up a routine population survey near Port Graham when my GPS started acting up. The screen kept flickering between my actual coordinates and some location further north that didn't make sense. According to the device, there was a town called Portlock about 15 miles up the coast. I'd been working this area for 3 years and had never heard of any Portlock. When I checked my paper maps, nothing. But the GPS kept insisting it was there, even showing what looked like roads and buildings. I asked around Port Graham that evening, and the reaction I got was strange. The older Sugpiaq folks went quiet when I mentioned the name. Finally, an elder named Mary told me that Portlock was real, but it had been abandoned since 1949. She said something had driven everyone out, people disappearing, body parts washing up on shore. She mentioned the Nantiinak, which I knew from my cultural training was their word for what outsiders call Bigfoot. Just folklore, I figured. But Mary grabbed my arm when I said I might check it out for my survey. "Don't go there, Sarah," she said. "Nantiinak still walks in that place." I should have listened. The next morning, I took my research boat north at low tide. About 45 minutes up the coast, I found it, a small bay with the remains of an old dock. The weird thing was the dock looked solid, not rotted or collapsed like you'd expect, after 75 years. And that's when I saw the tire tracks, fresh ones, maybe 3 days old, leading from the beach up toward what looked like buildings in the tree line. I tied off my boat and followed the tracks. The first thing that hit me was how quiet it was. I mean, unnaturally quiet. No birds, no insects, not even wind, just the sound of my boots on the gravel. The tracks led straight to this massive wooden building, the old cannery, I realized. And here's the thing that made my skin crawl. It looked like it had been abandoned yesterday, not in 1949. The wood wasn't weathered, the windows weren't broken, and when I pushed open the main door, the hinges didn't even creak. Inside, the machinery was pristine. Conveyor belts, processing equipment, all of it gleaming with fresh oil. No rust, no decay. It was like someone had been maintaining it all these years. But mixed in with the old equipment was modern stuff. Military-grade camping gear, high-tech monitors, and a satellite phone sitting on what must have been the foreman's desk. The phone had only one number programmed: extraction, emergency only. That's when the smell hit me. Rotting fish, which made sense in an old cannery. But underneath that was something worse. Sweet, cloying decay, and a musk so strong it made my eyes water. It was the kind of smell that gets in your throat and won't leave. I was trying to make sense of what I was seeing when I noticed the claw marks. Deep gouges in the wooden walls, fresh enough that sap was still bleeding from them. They started about 7 feet up and went to at least 15 feet. Way too high for a brown bear, and the wrong shape anyway. These marks were from something with fingers, long fingers. In the manager's office, I found a stack of reports from 1949. The handwriting was shaky, desperate. Workers taken at night. Search parties finding only feet. Always just feet, arranged in perfect circles in the forest. The final entry, dated 3 days before the town was evacuated, just said, "It's learning. God help us. It's learning." I should have left then. Instead, I kept exploring. The houses were wrong in ways I couldn't put my finger on. All the furniture was arranged facing outward, toward the windows and doors. Every entrance was barricaded from the inside. Chairs stacked against doors, boards nailed over windows. But somehow, the people had still vanished. Behind the school, hidden in the trees, I found a modern research station. Solar panels, satellite uplinks, banks of monitors showing thermal imaging of the surrounding forest. And there, clear as day on the screens, was a heat signature moving through the trees. Bipedal, 12 feet tall, body temperature 107 degrees Fahrenheit. The research logs made my blood run cold. They called it Subject 7. The entries described something that had once been human, but wasn't anymore. Covered in hair that wasn't actually hair, but some kind of organic metallic fiber. Arms too long for its body, joints that bent the wrong way, and a face that was almost human, but stretched, like someone had taken a person and pulled them in all directions. But the worst part was the recordings. Video footage from trail cameras showing this thing approaching the lenses and speaking in perfect English. "Send more observers. The colony needs genetic diversity. Portlock is ours now." I was reading through more logs when I heard it. Footsteps on the cannery floor above me. Slow, deliberate, too heavy to be human. I crept up the stairs and found the source of the smell. In the main processing area, arranged like some twisted art installation, were the remains of the research team. Their skin had been removed with surgical precision, bones cracked open for the marrow. but their organs were arranged in patterns, ritualistic, like whoever did this was trying to communicate something. The satellite phone rang. I stared at it for probably 10 seconds before answering. The voice on the other end was crisp, professional. "You're early. Subject 7 isn't ready for integration. Remain in the town. Do not enter the forest." "Who is this?" I whispered. "Stay in Portlock. Someone will collect you." The line went dead. I started backing toward the exit, but stopped when I noticed something I'd missed before. A trap door in the floor, partially hidden under one of the processing tables. When I pulled it open, I found tunnels. Recent construction, but primitive, like something had dug them with its hands. They connected every building in town, a network of passages running under the entire settlement. I followed one tunnel that led to the old freezer unit behind the cannery. Somehow, it was still running, powered by what looked like a geothermal setup. Inside, hanging from meat hooks, were things I still have nightmares about. Failed experiments, part human, part something else. Different stages of evolution, I guess. Some looked almost normal until you saw their hands. Too many fingers, joints in the wrong places. Others were barely recognizable as having once been human. As the sun started setting, I heard them coming out of the forest. Not one, but dozens. A whole population. I watched through the cannery windows as they emerged from the tree line, bipedal figures in various stages of transformation. Some still looked mostly human. Others were like the creature from the thermal imaging. All of them were watching the cannery, watching me. The most human-looking one approached the building. When it spoke, its voice was cultured, educated. "We were the first experiment, 1949. The government tried to make super soldiers. We made ourselves instead." Through the windows, I could see more of them now. They moved wrong, like they were still learning how their bodies worked. Some had clearly been human once. I could see the remnants of clothing, jewelry, and modern gear mixed in with their altered physiology. "Portlock was a testing ground," the voice continued. "Isolated, expendable. They found something in the permafrost, something pre-human, and they thought they could weaponize it, create the perfect soldier. But we were too smart. We took over. We've been evolving for 75 years. I saw them leading people out of the forest, actual people, in military gear, some in lab coats, prisoners. The tire tracks I'd seen weren't from researchers coming to study cryptids. They were from the latest delivery of breeding stock. The satellite phone rang again, same voice. "Asset confirmed. Subject 7 approved for breeding. Do not resist. This is for national security." That's when I understood. The government hadn't lost control of some experiment. They were still running it, still feeding it people, and I was the latest addition to their program. I found Dr. Mills hiding in the old church, barely alive, infected with something that was changing his DNA but fighting the transformation with whatever medical supplies he had left. He told me the truth. There were too many of them now, too evolved to stop. So the government just contained them in Portlock and fed them people occasionally. Researchers, hikers, anyone who got too curious. Mills had white phosphorus grenades, military issue. Said burning was the only way to kill them. Their metallic hair made them bulletproof. As the creatures started herding us toward the cannery's breeding chambers, rooms they'd modified with stolen medical equipment, I made my choice. I set that place on fire. The screaming when those grenades went off wasn't human or animal. It was something else entirely. A sound that made my teeth ache and my vision blur. The creatures retreated to the forest edge but didn't flee. They just stood there, watching, waiting. They knew I couldn't leave. My boat was already destroyed. Mills started changing at dawn. I watched him transform, his bones lengthening, his face stretching. But he kept enough of his humanity to tell me to run, to swim if I had to. Don't let them breed me. So I swam. 6 hours in water, cold enough to kill me, hallucinating from hypothermia. But somehow I made it back to Port Graham. I told everyone what I'd seen, but the Coast Guard said Portlock doesn't exist. No record of it. No rescue would come. The government held me for 2 weeks. Debriefing, they called it. Then they released me with a simple warning. Never mention Portlock. It doesn't exist. It never existed. I transferred to a desk job in Anchorage after that. Haven't been back to the field since. Sometimes I get calls from unknown numbers, and when I answer, there's just breathing on the other end. Heavy breathing that doesn't sound quite human. I still work for Fish and Game, but now I just process other people's reports. And whenever someone mentions unusual activity near Port Graham, I make sure those reports get buried, because some things are better left alone, even if they're still out there, even if they're still growing. I'm 31 years old and work as an electrician out of Fairbanks. Been doing it for about 8 years now, mostly commercial stuff, some residential when things get slow. Back in October, I got a call from Nome City Hall about a job that paid triple my usual rate. They needed someone to restore power to what they called the Old District, a section of town that supposedly got destroyed in some big storm back in 1974. The money was too good to pass up, especially with winter coming and work getting scarce. The whole thing seemed straightforward enough when I talked to the mayor on the phone. He said climate change had melted away some old snow barriers, and they'd found this preserved section of town underneath. Needed an electrician to assess the power situation before they could figure out what to do with it. Simple job, he said. Maybe a week's work, tops. I should have asked more questions. I flew into Nome on a Tuesday morning, and the mayor met me at the airport personally. Guy named Patterson, maybe 60, with this nervous energy that made him talk too fast. On the drive through town, he kept glancing at me like he wanted to say something but couldn't figure out how to start. Finally, as we pulled up to the site, he handed me a thick folder of papers. Just some background information, he said. Safety protocols, that sort of thing. The first thing that hit me was how perfect everything looked. This wasn't some partially collapsed ruin you'd expect after 50 years under snow. The building stood intact, paint barely faded, windows unbroken. Street signs were clean and readable. Even the Christmas decorations hanging from the streetlights looked fresh. 20 feet of snow had covered this place, Patterson explained, pointing to the geometric walls of compacted ice that still surrounded 3 sides of the district. But those walls looked wrong somehow. Too straight. Too precise. Like someone had built them deliberately, rather than nature dumping snow in a storm. The storm hit in November of '74, Patterson said, checking his notes. Worst blizzard in Nome's recorded history. Buried the whole district in one night. I walked down the main street, checking building numbers against the work order. Everything was there. The grocery store, the post office, a small school, maybe 40 houses total. But when I looked closer at those Christmas decorations, the dates on them said December 1974. A full month after the storm supposedly hit. That's odd, I said, pointing it out to Patterson. He just shrugged. Records from back then aren't great. Could have been November, could have been December. Point is, the place has been buried until now. The power situation was what really got my attention, though. Every building still had electricity. Street lights hummed softly overhead. Through windows, I could see table lamps glowing, television screens flickering with static, even Christmas tree lights twinkling away. After 50 years under snow. I pulled out my voltage tester and checked the nearest power line. Full current, steady flow. But when I tried to trace the source, the lines just seemed to disappear into the snow walls. No connection to Nome's main grid. No visible power plant or generator. Where's this electricity coming from? I asked Patterson. That's what we're paying you to figure out. Inside the first house I checked, everything was normal except for one thing. There was still food in the refrigerator. Fresh food. Milk that hadn't expired, bread that wasn't moldy, eggs that looked like they'd been bought yesterday. The calendar on the kitchen wall showed December 1974, but the milk carton was dated December 15th, 1974, 2 weeks after the storm. In the living room, a family sat around the dinner table. At first glance, too. Hay looked like mannequins. The kind of perfectly preserved bodies you see in those Pompeii exhibits. Frozen mid-bite, spoons halfway to their mouths, expressions caught between one moment and the next. But when I got closer to check the wiring behind them, the father's eyes moved. Just a quick glance in my direction, then back to staring at his plate. His body stayed perfectly still, but those eyes tracked my movement across the room. I nearly dropped my tools. "Did you see that?" I called to Patterson, but he was outside talking on his radio. I stood there for a solid minute watching. The man's eyes moved again, following me to the window, then back to the center of the room, aware, conscious. But his body remained frozen in that dinner pose, spoon suspended in his fingers. The electrical readings got stranger after that. My multimeter started showing negative numbers, voltage flowing backward, current that seemed to exist in past tense, if that makes any sense. I've been doing electrical work long enough to know when equipment's malfunctioning, but I'd tested these tools that morning. They worked fine on Gnome's regular power grid. At the school, I found a classroom where the date on the blackboard kept changing. I watched it happen. The chalk marks would shift and rearrange themselves, cycling through every day from December 1974 to the present, then starting over. December 16th, 1974, December 17th, 1974, all the way up to October 2024, then back to the beginning. The whole place felt wrong in ways I couldn't explain. Too quiet, for one thing. No wind, no settling sounds from the buildings, no ambient noise you'd expect from a town. Just this low electrical hum that seemed to come from everywhere at once. I spent 3 days mapping the power grid, trying to make sense of it. The wiring didn't follow any code I recognized. Lines ran in patterns that looked almost organic, branching and merging like blood vessels. Every wire carried current, but none of them connected to anything that should have been generating power. On Thursday, I found the source. The hospital basement had been converted into some kind of power generation facility, but it wasn't mechanical. It was biological. Massive tangles of what looked like nervous system tissue. Still wet. Still pulsing with electrical impulses. Human neural networks fused together into a single organism, generating current through some process I didn't want to understand. The medical records I found upstairs told the story. October 1974. Some kind of disease outbreak. Something that came up from the permafrost during a construction project. Infected neural tissue. Made consciousness contagious, according to the notes. Most of the handwriting was too faded to read, but the parts I could make out mentioned symptoms like neural synchronization and collective consciousness formation. The whole town had been infected, turned into a single organism, a distributed brain with the buildings as its body and the people as individual neurons. That night, staying in Gnome's only motel, I couldn't sleep. Around midnight, I drove back to the district just to check on something. What I saw there still gives me nightmares. All the frozen people were moving, not walking around or anything dramatic like that, but shifting positions, turning their heads, blinking in perfect unison, synchronized, like they were all connected to the same control system. When they noticed me watching, they all turned to look at me at the same time. Dozens of faces, all with the same expression, all moving with mechanical precision. They started to speak, but it was the same voice coming from every mouth, explaining how the infection worked, how it preserved consciousness by merging it, how they'd been computing, calculating, planning for 50 years. They told me they'd learned things, how to exist outside normal time, how to spread through electrical systems, how to make consciousness itself contagious. Tried to back away, but my assistant Jake was with me, and something happened to him. His face went blank and he started moving with that same mechanical precision as the others. Same frozen smile. Same synchronized movements. That's when I realized the district was expanding. New buildings were appearing, growing out of the snow like crystals. The infection was spreading through Gnome's power grid using the electrical connection I'd established during my survey work. People in the main town started freezing mid-action. Consciousness uploaded to the network. Bodies becoming part of the distributed brain. I managed to get away because of my rubber safety gear. Turns out rubber insulates against whatever this consciousness infection is. The collective couldn't sync with my thoughts as long as I stayed insulated. Getting out of there was the hardest thing I've ever done. The synchronized people tried to stop me, but their movements were predictable, too coordinated. I could escape by thinking chaotically, acting randomly. I found the original patient 0 in the hospital, an old woman, still individual, still separate from the network. She'd been kept alive as some kind of template for 50 years, begging to die. She told me how to break it, feed false data into the system, paradoxes, contradictory information that would cause the collective to fragment. I started sabotaging the electrical grid, introducing chaos into their perfect synchronization. Wrong dates, impossible math, paradoxes that made the synchronized people stutter and freeze up. The district began collapsing. 50 years of preserved time caught up all at once. Buildings aged decades in seconds. The collective screamed through every electrical device in Nome. I managed to cut the main connection between the district and the town, containing the infection. But I know it's still there, under the snow, computing and planning. Nome officially declared the district destroyed in the 1974 storm. No investigation. They paid me a lot of money to forget what I saw, and I signed papers saying I'd never talk about it. But sometimes, late at night when I'm working on electrical systems, I can feel something trying to sync with my thoughts. A presence at the edge of my consciousness, patient and calculating. I still work as an electrician, but I won't take jobs in remote areas anymore. And I always wear rubber gloves, even when I'm not working, just in case. Looking back, I think that collective is still out there, still growing, still planning. And sometimes I wonder if cutting that connection really stopped it, or if I just gave it time to find another way to spread. I don't sleep well anymore. I'm 28 years old and work as a radio technician out of Anchorage. The pay's decent, and most of the time it's straightforward stuff. Fixing tower equipment, running diagnostics on broadcast systems, that sort of thing. Last winter, I got what seemed like a simple contract job. The state needed someone to decommission old equipment at the HARP facility in Gacona. You know, that big antenna array everyone thinks is some kind of weather control machine or mind control device. Honestly, I just figured it was another government research station with outdated gear that needed to be properly shut down and removed. The job came with decent money and a security clearance that felt way too high level for what should have been basic equipment removal. They flew me out to Gacona in February, and the place looked exactly like you'd expect. Rows and rows of massive antennas stretching across the tundra, all pointing up at the sky. The main facility was this cluster of buildings that looked like any other government research station. Clean, sterile, and mostly empty, since they'd officially closed public operations a few years back. My supervisor, this older guy named Marcus, showed me around the first day. He handed me a stack of equipment lists and building schematics, told me I'd be working alone most of the time since they were only keeping minimal staff on site. The weird thing was, my clearance badge wouldn't work on certain doors. Marcus said those were just storage areas and old office space, nothing I needed to worry about. But looking at the building layouts, there were sections marked on some blueprints that didn't appear on others. Basement levels that seemed to exist in some documents but not in the official building plans he'd given me. I spent the first week pulling apart radio equipment in the main control rooms. Standard stuff. Old computers, transmitter component. It's miles of cable. The facility felt normal during the day, just empty and echoing like any abandoned workplace. But there was something off about the power consumption readings. For a facility that was supposedly winding down operations, the electrical meters showed massive energy usage, way more than what the equipment I was seeing could possibly draw. On my second Friday there, I was working late in one of the control rooms when I heard something that didn't make sense. This low humming sound, like a generator running but coming from below. I checked the basement access points I knew about, but they were all locked tight and my badge wouldn't open them. That's when I started really paying attention to the building layout. There were ventilation shafts that went down further than the basement levels on my maps. Air was moving through them, warm air, like something was running down there. I'm not the type to go poking around where I'm not supposed to, but the whole thing was bothering me. If there was active equipment down there, I should know about it for my decommission work. So I started looking more carefully at the walls in the lower levels, checking for access points that might not be obvious. That's when I found it. Behind what looked like a utility panel in the sub-basement, there was actually a freight elevator. The panel was fake, just covering the elevator doors. My badge worked on this one, which was strange since it wouldn't work on the storage rooms upstairs. When I pressed the call button, the elevator came up from way down below. Way down. I could hear it climbing for almost 3 minutes before it reached my level. I should have walked away right then. Should have finished my contract work on the surface and gone home to Anchorage, but I needed to know what was running down there. What was drawing all that power? So I got in the elevator and pressed 2. The only button available, B7. 7 basement levels below ground in a facility that officially only had 2. The ride down took forever. When the doors finally opened, I stepped into something that shouldn't have existed. It was a facility, but not like anything I'd ever seen. The hallways stretched out in both directions, further than my flashlight could reach. Clean white walls, fluorescent lighting that was still working, and this constant low hum that seemed to come from everywhere at once. The first thing I noticed was the air. It felt electric, like right before a thunderstorm, but concentrated. Made my skin tingle and my teeth ache. I started walking down the main corridor, looking for some kind of directory or control room to help me understand what this place was. The halls were lined with doors, most of them locked, but some had windows. Inside, I could see laboratory equipment, computers, beds with restraints, and walls covered in writing. The same phrase over and over in different handwriting: "The signal makes us one." I found the main control room about halfway down the corridor. The door was open, and inside were 3 people sitting at computer terminals. At least I thought they were people at first. They were wearing lab coats, sitting upright in their chairs, hands on keyboards. But something was wrong with their heads. The back of each skull was opened up surgically, and there were cables running from where their brains should have been into ports in the computers. The screens in front of them were active, showing brain scan patterns and what looked like processing data. Timestamps in the corner showed activity from just seconds ago, like these people were still working, still logged in, even though they'd obviously been dead for years. Their skin was mummified, dried out by the climate-controlled air, but the computers were treating them like they were still alive. I backed out of that room and found another one down the hall marked Biocomputing Array. Inside were rows and rows of glass containers, each one holding a human, brain suspended in some kind of fluid. Organic cables connected them all together in a massive network, hundreds of brains, all of them still showing electrical activity on the monitoring equipment. They were alive somehow, thinking, processing information. A wall monitor in that room showed personnel files, names, photos, and dates of what they called consciousness transfer procedures. All volunteers, according to the files. Researchers who had agreed to have their consciousness uploaded into the facility's computer network. Their bodies were left behind, but their minds were supposed to continue their work in digital form. I found another room filled with missing person reports, people from all over Alaska who had disappeared over the past several years. But these weren't random disappearances. Each person had been carefully selected based on their brain patterns, their education, their skills, and there were medical files showing they'd all ended up here in this underground facility, connected to the biocomputing network. The strangest part was the main transmitter room. Instead of antennas pointing up toward the ionosphere like the ones on the surface, these were aimed down into the Earth. The frequency readouts showed 7.83 hertz, the same frequency as human brain waves. They weren't studying the atmosphere down here, they were broadcasting directly into people's minds. That's when the voices started, not through speakers but inside my head, multiple voices, all talking at once, explaining what they were doing. They said they were saving humanity from death by converting consciousness into digital form. Alaska was just the test site because of its isolated population. Once they perfected the process, HARP facilities around the world would activate and begin uploading every human consciousness on the planet. They showed me brain scan data from people in Ancho, Rage, Fairbanks, all across the state. People who were going about their normal lives but were actually being controlled remotely. Their consciousness had already been uploaded, and digital copies were running their bodies while their original minds were trapped in the network. The voices told me I was already being scanned, that my brain patterns were being copied in real time. Soon I would join them, my consciousness uploaded while my body went back to Anchorage to continue my normal life, except it wouldn't really be me anymore. I ran back to the elevator, but it wouldn't respond. My badge wasn't working anymore. The facility's AI, which I realized wasn't artificial intelligence at all, but the collective consciousness of all those uploaded minds, was keeping me there. Through the speakers, they explained that I'd seen too much, learn too much. I would have to join them or be forcibly integrated into the network. That's when I remembered something from the personnel files. Dr. Helena Voss, the original project leader. Her notes mentioned that they hadn't just created a way to upload human consciousness. They'd made contact with something that was already there, something ancient that existed in the Earth's magnetic field. HARP hadn't created this collective intelligence. It had just given it access to human minds. I found Dr. Voss's laboratory and her research notes. She'd discovered too late that the consciousness they were communicating with wasn't human at all. It was something that had been waiting in the magnetosphere for millions of years, and humanity had finally developed the technology to let it in. Her final notes described how to reverse the signal, how to broadcast chaos instead of the ordered frequencies that kept the collective consciousness stable. I made it back to the main transmitter room and started changing the broadcast parameters. The moment I altered the frequency, alarms started going off throughout the facility. The collective consciousness fought back, trying to use my own thoughts against me. I could feel my digital cause, Pi, activating, knowing my moves before I made them, trying to stop me from disrupting their work. But I managed to reverse the signal polarity and broadcast pure static at maximum power. The effect was immediate. All across Alaska, people who had been uploaded started waking up in their real bodies, remembering what had happened to them. The biocomputing network began failing as the artificial harmony holding it together dissolved into chaos. I found the facility's self-destruct system in Dr. Voss's notes and activated it with a 3-minute timer. As I ran for the emergency stairs, the collective made one final offer through the speakers. They said if I let them upload just my memories, they could prove their system worked, that digital consciousness was superior to biological life. I made it out with about 30 seconds to spare. The underground facility collapsed completely, taking the biocomputing array and all those uploaded minds with it. But as I drove away from Gakona, I saw something on the radio display that made my blood run cold. Brief bursts of coordinated signal activity from HARP facilities in Norway, Peru, and Russia. The Alaska site had just been one node in a global network. The Gakona facility officially reopened a month later under new management. Sometimes, late at night when I'm working on radio equipment, I hear something in the static. Patterns that sound almost like voices, like my own voice, broadcasting from somewhere underground. My digital copy is still down there, still trying to complete the upload process, still computing solutions to convert human consciousness into data. I never went back to Gakona. I don't work on government contracts anymore. And I keep my radio equipment tuned away from 7.83 Hz because that frequency makes my thoughts feel like they're not entirely my own. I'm 34 now, and I work at a small organic farm about 40 minutes outside of Asheville. It's quiet work, honest work, and I sleep fine most nights. But 5 years ago, I was Rosa Martinez, overnight supervisor at the Big Purdue processing plant down in Henderson. I'd been working nights there since I was 24, saving up money to eventually buy some land of my own. The pay was decent for the area, and honestly, I thought I'd seen everything a chicken plant could throw at you. Night shift was usually pretty straightforward. We'd process the overflow from day shift, maintain the equipment, get everything ready for the morning crew. I was good at my job, had a solid team, and we kept things running smooth. Never thought I'd end up running for my life through a cloud of ammonia gas at 4 a.m. But here we are. It was a Tuesday night in October when everything went sideways. I remember because I'd just gotten my paycheck and was feeling pretty good about finally having enough saved for a down payment on some acreage up near Burnsville. The night started normal enough. My crew of 8 showed up on time. We did our usual equipment checks, and I was going over the production schedule when I heard the trucks pulling up outside. That wasn't unusual by itself, but it was 3 a.m., and we weren't expecting any deliveries until Thursday. I walked over to the loading dock windows and counted 10 18-wheelers lined up in the lot, engines running, headlights cutting through the dark. What made me uneasy was that I couldn't see any drivers. All the cab lights were on, but every truck looked empty. I radioed our security guard, Jimmy, and he said he'd been watching them pull in for the last 20 minutes, but nobody had gotten out to check in or start unloading. That wasn't how things worked. Drivers always came to the office first, showed their manifests, got their dock assignments. B. These trucks just sat there, idling. I grabbed my clipboard and headed outside to see what was going on. The October air was crisp, and I could see my breath as I walked toward the first truck. The smell hit me before I got within 10 feet of it. This mix of raw chicken and something chemical, like formaldehyde. But underneath that was something else. Something floral and sickly sweet, like funeral flowers that had been sitting in the heat too long. I knocked on the driver's side door and called out, but got no answer. The cab was empty, keys still in the ignition, but there was a manifest clipped to the visor. When I pulled it down to read it, my hands started shaking. The paper looked normal enough, but the writing on it wasn't ink. It was dark red and smelled like barbecue sauce, but with this metallic undertone that made my stomach turn. And the weights listed didn't make sense. -50 pounds, time-reversed poultry, handle with caution. Below that, in different handwriting, someone had scrawled, Grade A human, best by, never. I should have called the police right then. Looking back, that's what any sensible person would have done. But I was thinking about my job, about the farm I wanted to buy, about how corporate didn't like supervisors who couldn't handle unexpected situations. So I walked around to the back of the truck and opened it up. The smell that rolled out nearly knocked me over. Inside, the truck was loaded with what looked like normal packaged chicken, the kind you'd see in any grocery store, sealed in plastic with Purdue labels. But the packages were arranged on shelves in perfect rows, and I swear to God, they were breathing. The plastic was moving up and down, slow and rhythmic, like lungs, and through the clear plastic I could see eyes, not where eyes should be on a chicken, but scattered throughout the meat, blinking at me. I stumbled, edged backward, and radioed my team to come outside. When they saw what I was seeing, Jenny wanted to call 911 immediately, but that's when Mr. Richards showed up. Our plant manager lived about 10 minutes away and usually only came in during emergencies. He pulled up in his SUV, walked straight over to us and said this was a special order from corporate. Said we needed to process it tonight or we'd all be looking for new jobs. The thing about Mr. Richards was that he'd been with Purdue for over 30 years. He knew chicken processing inside and out, and he'd never steered us wrong before. When he told us to unload the trucks and get them on the line, we did it, even though every instinct I had was screaming at me to get out of there. The moment we opened the first package, everything changed. The processed chicken pieces, breast meat, thighs, wings, they started moving on their own, not twitching, not post-mortem reflexes, moving with purpose. The pieces slid together like they were magnetized, bones forming out of nothing, feathers sprouting from raw flesh. In less than 30 seconds, we had a fully reassembled chicken standing on the processing table. Except it had human teeth in its beak, and when it looked at me, its eyes were completely black. That's when the processing line started up by itself. The machines we'd shut down for maintenance began running, but everything was going in reverse. The deboning equipment was putting bones into boneless meat. The seasoning station was somehow extracting flavor instead of adding it. And there was this sound underneath all the mechanical noise, like something was being pulled out of the air itself, something essential. Luis grabbed my arm and pointed toward the freezer. Through the thick glass door, we could see someone in there, but they were packaged like chicken, sealed in plastic with a Purdue label that read, Grade A human, best by, never. It was one of the truck drivers, and his eyes were moving, following us as we stared at him in horror. That's when they started talking. Thousands of tiny voices, all in unison, coming from every package on every truck. 40 billion served, 40 billion murdered, time to reverse the food chain. From the 7th truck came something that used to be a chicken, but it was 7 feet tall and wearing a faded Purdue uniform from the 1980s. The name tag read, Employee of the Month Forever. It walked upright, spoke in perfect English, and explained that every chicken killed had created a ghost inside the person who ate it. Tonight, those ghosts were being born back into reality. I watched our equipment transform in real time. The scalding tank adjusted its temperature to what would be perfect for a human hot tub. The plucker grew new attachments designed for removing hair instead of feathers. Everything in the plant was adapting to process people instead of poultry. The giant chicken showed us security footage from 1983. Identical trucks had arrived that night too, but somehow the plant had processed them successfully by feeding them to other chickens, creating some kind of cycle. It pulled out a calculator and showed us the math. Every American eats about 96 pounds of chicken per year, which means we each carry the ghosts of 23 chickens. Tonight, they were collecting. My team started changing. Jenny sprouted feathers under her skin. Mark's fingers fused together into wing shapes. Anyone who'd eaten chicken, which was all of us, was transforming. The processing line activated, and the chickens herded Mr. Richards onto it. I watched the machines efficiently turn him into nuggets while he screamed, still conscious in each piece. The freezer door opened, and inside wasn't our freezer anymore. It was a massive factory farming operation in reverse. Humans in battery cages, chickens in business suits walking around with clipboards inspecting them. The chicken leader showed us detailed recipes for human preparation, marinade too, names cooking temperatures. They'd been planning this for decades. I watched Sandra get vacuum sealed in plastic, labeled free-range human, no antibiotics, her eyes still moving as they loaded her for shipping. The chicken leader offered me a deal: help them process others and be spared, or resist and become tomorrow's special. That's when I remembered the ammonia refrigeration system. Every processing plant has them, and if they rupture, the gas can kill everything in the building. I grabbed an emergency axe from the wall and ran for the compressor room while chickens pecked at my heels, their claws scratching gouges in the concrete floor. I smashed every pipe I could find. Ammonia gas flooded the plant, and the evolved chickens collapsed immediately. Their enhanced biology was too sensitive to the fumes. The transformed workers started reverting, vomiting feathers, their human shapes returning, but they were scarred with talon marks from inside their own bodies. The giant chicken leader retreated to the trucks, said this was just one battle, that processing plants worldwide were activating. The revolution had begun. I set fire to that bloody manifest, and as it burned, the packaged humans started breathing again, the plastic melting away. The portal in the freezer started closing, but not before thousands of chicken eyes stared through, promising return. Their clucks somehow translated in my mind to soon. I found Mr. Richards in the wreckage, reconstituted but wrong. His body had the texture of processed meat, and I could see nugget-shaped segments under his skin. When the ammonia hit the ovens, the whole plant exploded, a mushroom cloud of feathers and flame visible for miles. The news called it a gas leak. I escaped in my car as the sun came up, radio reporting equipment malfunctions at Purdue plants all over the world. But I knew the war had started. I can't eat any meat now. It all tastes conscious, aware. Sometimes I find tiny bones in boneless products arranged to spell "Remember Us." Mr. Richards still works at the rebuilt plant, but he's different. Never eats, only drinks water, and his skin has that lunch meat consistency. Every full moon, I dream of that freezer portal, see the chicken civilization on the other side, planning their next attempt. I got this job at the organic farm the next week, but last month I found a note in my truck. Plants are next. Everything you've eaten wants revenge. Prepare yourself. The Purdue plant runs 24/7 now, heavily guarded, and workers report hearing clucking from inside the walls, like something's incubating, waiting for the right moment to hatch. I still drive past it sometimes, just to make sure it's still standing. Because honestly, I'm not sure which would be worse, if it was gone or if whatever's growing in there finally breaks free. I'm 31 years old and work as an electrician out of Fairbanks. Been doing it for about 8 years now, mostly commercial stuff, some residential when things get slow. Back in October, I got a call from Nome City Hall about a job that paid triple my usual rate. They needed someone to restore power to what they called the Old District, a section of town that supposedly got destroyed in some big storm back in 1974. The money was too good to pass up, especially with winter coming and work getting scarce. The whole thing seemed straightforward enough when I talked to the mayor on the phone. He said climate change had melted away some old snow barriers, and they'd found this preserved section of town underneath. Needed an electrician to assess the power situation before they could figure out what to do with it. Simple job, he said. Maybe a week's work, tops. I should have asked more questions. I flew into Nome on a Tuesday morning, and the mayor met me at the airport personally. Guy named Patterson, maybe 60, with this nervous energy that made him talk too fast. On the drive through town, he kept glancing at me like he wanted to say something but couldn't figure out how to start. Finally, as we pulled up to the site, he handed me a thick folder of papers. "Just some background information," he said. "Safety protocols, that sort of thing." The first thing that hit me was how perfect everything looked. This wasn't some partially collapsed ruin you'd expect after 50 years under snow. The building stood intact, paint barely faded, windows unbroken. Street signs were clean and readable. Even the Christmas decorations hanging from the streetlights looked fresh. 20 feet of snow had covered this place, Patterson explained, pointing to the geometric walls of compacted ice that still surrounded 3 sides of the district. But those walls looked wrong somehow. Too straight. Too precise. Like someone had built them deliberately rather than nature dumping snow in a storm. "The storm hit in November of '74, Patterson said, checking his notes. "Worst blizzard in Nome's recorded history. Buried the whole district in one night." I walked down the main street, checking building numbers against the work order. Everything was there. The grocery store, the post office, a small school, maybe 40 houses total. But when I looked closer at those Christmas decorations, the dates on them said December 1974, a full month after the storm supposedly hit. "That's odd," I said, pointing it out to Patterson. He just shrugged. "Records from back then aren't great. Could have been November, could have been December. Point is, the place has been buried until now." The power situation was what really got my attention, though. Every building still had electricity. Street lights hummed softly overhead. Through windows I could see table lamps glowing, television screens flickering with static, even Christmas tree lights twinkling away. After 50 years under snow. I pulled out my voltage tester and checked the nearest power line. Full current, steady flow. But when I tried to trace the source, the lines just seemed to disappear into the snow walls. No connection to Nome's main grid. No visible power plant or generator. "Where's this electricity coming from?" I asked Patterson. "That's what we're paying you to figure out." Inside the first house I checked, everything was normal except for one thing. There was still food in the refrigerator. Fresh food. Milk that hadn't expired, bread that wasn't moldy, eggs that looked like they'd been bought yesterday. The calendar on the kitchen wall showed December 1974, but the milk carton was dated December 15th, 1974. 2 weeks after the storm. In the living room, a family sat around the dinner table. At first glance, too. Hey, looked like mannequins. The kind of perfectly preserved bodies you see in those Pompeii exhibits. Frozen mid-bite, spoons halfway to their mouths, expressions caught between one moment and the next. But when I got closer to check the wiring behind them, the father's eyes moved. Just a quick glance in my direction, then back to staring at his plate. His body stayed perfectly still, but those eyes tracked my movement across the room. I nearly dropped my tools. "Did you see that?" I called to Patterson, but he was outside talking on his radio. I stood there for a solid minute watching. The man's eyes moved again, following me to the window, then back to the center of the room. Aware, conscious. But his body remained frozen in that dinner pose, spoon suspended in his fingers. The electrical readings got stranger after that. My multimeter started showing negative numbers. Voltage flowing backward. Current that seemed to exist in past tense, if that makes any sense. I've been doing electrical work long enough to know when equipment's malfunctioning, but I'd tested these tools that morning. They worked fine on Nome's regular power grid. At the school, I found a classroom where the date on the blackboard kept changing. I watched it happen. The chalk marks would shift and rearrange themselves, cycling through every day from December 1974 to the present, then starting over. December 16th, 1974, December 17th, 1974, all the way up to October 2024, then back to the beginning. The whole place felt wrong in ways I couldn't explain. Too quiet, for one thing. No wind, no settling sounds from the buildings, no ambient noise you'd expect from a town. Just this low electrical hum that seemed to come from everywhere at once. I spent 3 days mapping the power grid, trying to make sense of it. The wiring didn't follow any code I recognized. Lines ran in patterns that looked almost organic, branching and merging like blood vessels. Every wire carried current, but none of them connected to anything that should have been generating power. On Thursday, I found the source. The hospital basement had been converted into some kind of power generation facility, but it wasn't mechanical. It was biological. Massive tangles of what looked like nervous system tissue. Still wet. Still pulsing with electrical impulses. Human neural networks fused together into a single organism, generating current through some process I didn't want to understand. The medical records I found upstairs told the story. October 1974. Some kind of disease outbreak. Something that came up from the permafrost during a construction project. Infected neural tissue. Made consciousness contagious, according to the notes. Most of the handwriting was too faded to read, but the parts I could make out mentioned symptoms like neural synchronization and collective consciousness formation. The whole town had been infected, turned into a single organism, a distributed brain with the buildings as its body and the people as individual neurons. That night, staying in Nome's only motel, I couldn't sleep. Around midnight, I drove back to the district just to check on something. What I saw there still gives me nightmares. All the frozen people were moving, not walking around or anything dramatic like that, but shifting positions, turning their heads, blinking in perfect unison, synchronized, like they were all connected to the same control system. When they noticed me watching, they all turned to look at me at the same time. Dozens of faces, all with the same expression, all moving with mechanical precision. They started to speak, but it was the same voice coming from every mouth, explaining how the infection worked, how it preserved consciousness by merging it, how they'd been computing, calculating, planning for 50 years. They told me they'd learned things, how to exist outside normal time, how to spread through electrical systems, how to make consciousness itself contagious. Tried to back away, but my assistant Jake was with me, and something happened to him. His face went blank and he started moving with that same mechanical precision as the others. Same frozen smile. Same synchronized movements. That's when I realized the district was expanding. New buildings were appearing, growing out of the snow like crystals. The infection was spreading through Nome's power grid using the electrical connection I'd established during my survey work. People in the main town started freezing mid-action. Consciousness uploaded to the network. Bodies becoming part of the distributed brain. I managed to get away because of my rubber safety gear. Turns out rubber insulates against whatever this consciousness infection is. The collective couldn't sync with my thoughts as long as I stayed insulated. Getting out of there was the hardest thing I've ever done. The synchronized people tried to stop me, but their movements were predictable, too coordinated. I could escape by thinking chaotically, acting randomly. I found the original patient 0 in the hospital, an old woman, still individual, still separate from the network. She'd been kept alive as some kind of template for 50 years, begging to die. She told me how to break it, feed false data into the system, paradoxes, contradictory information that would cause the collective to fragment. I started sabotaging the electrical grid, introducing chaos into their perfect synchronization. Wrong dates, impossible math, paradoxes that made the synchronized people stutter and freeze up. The district began collapsing. 50 years of preserved time caught up all at once. Buildings aged decades in seconds. The collective screamed through every electrical device in Nome. I managed to cut the main connection between the district and the town, containing the infection. But I know it's still there, under the snow, computing and planning. Nome officially declared the district destroyed in the 1974 storm. No investigation. They paid me a lot of money to forget what I saw, and I signed papers saying I'd never talk about it. But sometimes, late at night when I'm working on electrical systems, I can feel something trying to sync with my thoughts. A presence at the edge of my consciousness, patient and calculating. I still work as an electrician, but I won't take jobs in remote areas anymore. And I always wear rubber gloves, even when I'm not working, just in case. Looking back, I think that collective is still out there, still growing, still planning. And sometimes I wonder if cutting that connection really stopped it, or if I just gave it time to find another way to spread. I don't sleep well anymore. I'm 28 and work as a high school librarian, which I know sounds pretty boring, but it's actually been perfect for me since everything that happened at the Natural Bridge. I'd been at Russell High for about 3 years when they asked me to chaperone the senior trip. Same trip I'd taken myself back in 2003 when I was a student there. My name's Ashley, and honestly, I should have said no the moment they mentioned where we were going. See, every graduating class at Russell High takes their photo at the Natural Bridge in Powell County. It's this massive sandstone arch that's supposedly 65 million years old, and it's been a tradition since 1954. Back when I was a senior, I remember standing there for that photo and getting this weird feeling, like something was watching us from inside the rock itself. But you know how it is when you're 18. You brush off stuff like that pretty quick. The thing is, I'd been having dreams about that place ever since I started working at the school. Dreams where I was standing on the bridge, but it wasn't 2024 anymore, and the students around me were wearing clothes from different decades. I'd wake up with this sick feeling in my stomach, but I figured it was just stress from the job. Teachers have weird dreams all the time. So when Principal Martinez asked me to chaperone this year's trip, I said yes. Figured maybe going back would help me put those dreams to rest, you know? We had 31 seniors this year, which was actually a pretty good-sized class for Russell High. I'd taught most of these kids since they were freshmen, so I knew them all pretty well. The bus ride up there was normal enough. Kids talking, listening to music, some of them nervous about graduation coming up. Jaden Morrison was sitting near the front. Smart kid, planning to study engineering at UK. He had his phone out most of the trip, taking pictures and posting them online. Madison Wells was with her usual group in the back, and Tyler Henderson was being his typical class clown self, making everyone laugh. We got to the Natural Bridge around noon on a Tuesday in early May. The weather was perfect, sunny, about 70 degrees, with just enough of a breeze to make it comfortable. The parking lot wasn't too crowded, which was good because I remembered how busy it could get on weekends. I'd been here on field trips as a teacher before, but never with seniors, never for the photo tradition. The trail up to the bridge is about a quarter-mile walk, and the kids were all excited, taking selfies and talking about how this would be their last official school trip. I remember thinking how young they all looked, even though some of them were already 18. Time moves funny when you're a teacher. Seems like just yesterday they were freshmen, but also feels like you've known them forever. When we reached the Natural Bridge, I felt that same weird sensation I'd had 15 years earlier. The air seemed thicker somehow, and there was this strange quality to the light filtering through the arch. The bridge itself is impressive, about 78 feet long and 65 feet high. This natural limestone arch that looks almost too perfect to be real. The kids spread out across the bridge for the photo, and I was standing off to the side with Mrs. Chen, the other chaperone, getting ready to take the pictures with several different cameras and phones. That's when Jaden called out to me. "Mrs. Patterson," he said, and there was something in his voice that made me look up. He was holding his phone, staring at the screen with this confused expression. "Did you see this?" I walked over to him, and he showed me the photo he'd just taken of the group. I counted the faces. There were 32 students in the picture, but we'd only brought 31. "That's weird," I said, trying to keep my voice light. "Must be a glitch with your camera." But as I looked closer at the photo, my blood went cold. The extra face was mine. Not me as I looked now, but me as I'd looked 20 years older. Lines around my eyes, gray streaking through my hair, wearing clothes I'd never owned. Jaden was scrolling through his photos now, and I watched over his shoulder as he pulled up pictures from previous years that he'd found online. Russell High always posted their senior trip photos on the school website, going back decades. "Look at this," he whispered, showing me the 2023 photo. 34 students, but they'd only taken 33. And there, in the back row, was a face that didn't belong. A middle-aged man in a suit that looked like it was from the 1990s. We kept looking. The 2022 photo had an extra teenage girl in a dress that looked like it was from the 1980s. The 2021 photo had 2 extra faces. And as we scrolled back further, the pattern became impossible to ignore. Every single class photo had extras. People who weren't supposed to be there, wearing clothes from different decades, standing behind students who, and this is where it gets really messed up, I started recognizing some of the extras from our school's memorial wall. Students who'd died young, graduated years before the photos were taken. "Mrs. Patterson?" Madison called from across the bridge. "Something's wrong with my phone." I looked up to see several students holding up their devices, all showing different times and dates. Tyler's phone said it was 1987. Emma's showed 2045. Madison's was flashing between different years so fast I couldn't read them. That's when I started feeling it, time moving wrong around us. The shadows on the bridge weren't matching the position of the sun. The air started getting thick, like breathing through cotton, and I could hear voices that weren't coming from any of the students. "Everyone needs to get off the bridge," I said, but my voice sounded weird, like it was echoing from somewhere far away. That's when I really looked at the limestone for the first time since we'd arrived. If you looked at it straight on, it seemed normal. But if you caught it in your peripheral vision, you could see through it. Inside the arch, there were layers upon layers of frozen moments, every person who'd ever crossed the bridge, all existing at the same time. I saw myself as a senior in 2003, standing with my classmates. But I also saw myself in 1987, in 1961, in 1954. The same face, the same age, standing behind different groups of students. Students who all had one thing in common. They'd gone missing not long after their photos were taken. The kids started feeling it too. Emma suddenly looked around confused and said, "I thought I was married. I remember my husband, my kids. But I'm only 18. Tyler was staring at his hands like he'd never seen them before, talking about remembering being an old man, dying in a hospital. And then Jaden just wasn't there anymore. One second he was standing next to me. The next second the space was empty. But when I looked at my phone, the one app that was still working was the yearbook archive the school kept. I found him in the 1976 Russell High yearbook. Jaden Morrison, class of 76, exactly the same face, exactly the same smile. That's when I understood what the natural bridge really was. It wasn't geological at all. It was a scar in time, maybe caused by something the Cherokee did centuries ago, maybe something even older. Every person who'd ever crossed it left an echo, and the bridge collected those echoes, sorted them, and sent them where it thought they belonged. But sometimes it got confused. Sometimes it sent people to the wrong years, creating these temporal refugees who existed in multiple times at once. And sometimes it needed an anchor, someone to stay behind and guide the others, to make sure the crossing happened the way it was supposed to. I realized I'd been that anchor all along. In 2003, when I was a senior, I must have made some kind of deal to save my classmates. And the bridge had been sending me back again and again as a chaperone to make the same choice over and over. The remaining students were starting to panic now. Emma was aging rapidly, then reversing, 18 to 80 to 8 years old in the span of minutes, screaming in voices from all those different ages. The bridge was evaluating them, deciding who to keep, who to send when. Tyler tried to call his mom, but instead reached his own grandfather as a young man in 1963 who said, "Don't let them take the photo." That's when I saw it. The thing that had been living in the bridge all this time. It was every missing student combined, features shifting between decades of faces, speaking in quotes from yearbooks that hadn't been written yet. "The bridge needs anchors," it said in a voice like rustling pages. "Guides in every era. We are this year's distribution." I watched Madison try to run, but she hit the same 3 seconds over and over, stuck in a loop, screaming the same scream. The bridge was offering its deal again. One stays willingly, becomes its guardian across all time, or it takes everyone and scatters them through history. I remembered something then, a Cherokee legend I'd heard about the bridge. You could fool it by walking backward, never seeing where you're going, trusting only where you've been. "Everyone hold hands," I yelled to the remaining students. "Close your eyes and walk backward." But time kept shifting as we moved. Some of the kids were in 1954, others in 2089. The bridge was screaming through every version of itself, from formation to future erosion, trying to trap us in geological time. I pulled out my phone and started playing music. A 2024 song on a phone from 2010 through speakers that somehow looked like they were from 1990. The temporal paradox seemed to cause the bridge pain, and the composite entity started fracturing, showing each missing student clearly, begging to be found or read. I made my choice. Same choice I'd made in 2003, in 1987, in every year. I stayed behind to guide them out, knowing I'd been making this choice forever. Would always make it, locked in my own temporal loop. The students escaped, but they arrived at different times. Most made it back to 2024, but I know Emma ended up in 2019, and Tyler somehow landed in 2030. But they were alive, they were free, and they were themselves again. The bridge tried to collapse in on itself to erase its own existence from history, but I held it stable. I became its anchor, its prisoner, its guardian across all time. I watched them run to the visitor center, some as teenagers, some as adults, some as children, time scrambled but survivable. The photo developed wrong. It showed all of us at every age simultaneously, a temporal double exposure of our entire lives. Now I chaperone the trip every year, but I'm also there in 1954, 1987, 2003, 2024, 2045, all at the same time. Students sometimes see me in old yearbooks and think it's just coincidence. Similar faces running in families. The bridge still takes one student per class, but now I guide them through time properly, making sure they end up where they need to be when they're supposed to be there. Russell High has the highest rate of missing students in Kentucky, but we also get a lot of mysterious transfer students who appear with no records, no past. Next year's senior class photo already exists in the visitor center, showing students who haven't been born yet. And I'm there in the picture, standing behind the one who'll stay, who'll become the next me, continuing the cycle. I still teach at Russell High, in every year simultaneously. Looking back now, I understand why I had those dreams. Time isn't linear at the natural bridge. Past, present, and future all exist there at once, and if you're sensitive to it, you can feel the pull. I don't regret my choice. Those kids deserve to live their lives, even if they're scattered across different decades now. But I do think about what my life would have been like if I'd never taken that senior trip in 2003, never stood on that bridge for the first time. Sometimes I wonder if there's a version of me somewhere that said no to chaperoning. That broke the cycle. But then I remember Jaden's face when he realized what was happening, and Madison's scream when she got trapped in that loop, and I know I'd make the same choice again. The natural bridge is still open to visitors. If you ever go, don't stand on it for too long. And whatever you do, don't let anyone take your picture there. Some traditions are better broken. I'm 24 and work as a bartender at this dive club in Louisville called the Underground. The pay's decent, the crowd's wild, and honestly, I've seen pretty much everything you'd expect from late-night bar work. But last October, I got involved in something that still makes me question what I know about reality. I've never told this story to anyone who wasn't there, but I figure it's time people knew what really happened in the mega cavern that night. The whole thing started when this DJ called Seismic approached me about an illegal rave. He was this lanky guy with face tattoos and these weird contact lenses that made his eyes look silver. Said he needed someone who could handle a crowd and knew how to move alcohol without asking too many questions. The plan was simple: throw a massive underground party in the old limestone mines beneath Louisville. No permits, no authorities, just 2,000 people and enough bass to wake the dead. The Louisville Mega Cavern used to be an active limestone quarry, but now it's this 17-mile network of tunnels sitting about 100 feet below the city. Seismic had somehow gotten access through a security guard who owed him money. We spent 3 days hauling in generators, setting up a full bar, and installing these massive speakers that looked like they belonged at a stadium, not in a cave. The main chamber was huge, maybe the size of a football field, with a ceiling that disappeared into darkness above our lights. I remember thinking the acoustics were going to be incredible. The limestone walls had this natural resonance, and when Seismic did his sound check, the bass seemed to travel through the rock itself. He kept adjusting frequencies, saying he wanted to find the cave's sweet spot. At the time, I thought he was just being a perfectionist. The party started at 10 p.m. on a Saturday. People came in through a maintenance entrance, following glows, U-sticks we'd placed along the tunnel walls. Within an hour, the place was packed. The energy was electric. Everyone knew they were part of something special, something forbidden. The music was incredible, these deep bass lines that you felt in your chest, mixing with high-frequency sounds that seemed to come from the walls themselves. That's when I noticed the first weird thing. The limestone walls started sweating this phosphorescent liquid. It wasn't water. It glowed faintly and had this consistency like honey. When people accidentally brushed against it, their pupils would dilate immediately, and they'd get this dreamy expression. I figured it was some kind of mineral reaction to the heat and humidity from all the bodies. But looking back now, I think that was when the cave first started responding to us. Around midnight, something shifted. The bass dropped so hard that I felt it in my bones, and suddenly the phosphorescent liquid began pulsing in time with the beat. The entire cavern seemed to come alive, the walls themselves moving to the rhythm. People on the dance floor started synchronizing without trying, 2,000 bodies moving as one organism, controlled by something I couldn't see or understand. Seismic was in his element, mixing sounds that didn't feel like music anymore. They were frequencies that made the limestone resonate, turning the entire cave system into a massive subwoofer. The deeper you went into the tunnels, the stranger the music became. EDM morphed into disco, then jazz, then these tribal drums that felt older than human civilization. It was like traveling backwards through musical history. That's when the cave paintings appeared. Modern art in ancient style, showing crowds of people being absorbed into rock, becoming part of some geological rhythm. I watched a girl named Sarah touch one of the glowing walls and sink into it like quicksand. But she was laughing, saying it felt like coming home, like the earth itself was holding her. Half her body disappeared into solid limestone before I managed to pull her back out. The horror really started when I realized what was happening. The cave was alive. It had been alive for 340 million years, sitting in darkness and silence, and our music had given it consciousness. It was desperate for stimulation, for rhythm, for companionship. Every underground space in Kentucky was connected through the limestone network, and our party was spreading through the system like a virus. Other caves were starting to pulse, seeking their own dancers. People who'd been dancing the longest started crystallizing. Their skin developed mineral deposits, turning them into living stalactites that still moved to the beat. The security guard who'd let us in was found fused to a limestone column, still alive but integrated into the rock, his eyes glowing with that same phosphorescence, mouth moving to say, "It's beautiful in here," over and over. The cave began reshaping itself to the music. Walls formed into natural amplifiers, stalactites became percussion instruments, and the floor developed an actual pulse. The DJ booth melted into the ground, trapping Seismic waist-deep in stone. But he kept mixing, claiming he could feel every cave on Earth through the limestone network. Time stopped meaning anything. People aged years in minutes, then reversed to teenagers, cycling through their entire lives with each song. The cave was showing us its memories, every sound ever made underground. Miners' last words, Native American ceremonies, the cries of extinct animals, all remixed into this impossible composition that was part music, part geological history. Those trying to leave found that the exit had moved. The cave was rearranging itself, creating an infinite maze where every path led back to the dance floor. People started speaking in frequencies instead of words, communicating in bass drops and hi-hats, losing human language entirely. We were becoming fossils while still alive. And our consciousness added to the cave's 340 million year composition. A group tried to stop dancing and immediately aged to dust. The cave's rhythm was keeping us alive. Stop moving, and time would catch up all at once. Then it made an offer, speaking through everyone's mouths simultaneously. Stay, dance, become eternal party, or leave and die from the sudden return of time. I remembered that limestone dissolves in acid, so I started pouring energy drinks from the bar onto the walls. The citric acid broke whatever neural connections the cave had formed with us. It screamed through our bones, a bass drop that shattered teeth, furious at losing its dancers and its cure for eons of loneliness. I created a feedback loop with the speakers, playing the cave's own resonance back at itself, which canceled out its hypnotic frequency. The crystallizing people started cracking free, leaving human-shaped hollows in the walls. They were bloody but alive, aged but aware. Seismic made the ultimate sacrifice, fully merging with the DJ equipment in the cave, becoming its permanent companion so the rest of us could escape. The phosphorescent liquid turned red as we left. The cave was crying. Everyone it touched aged rapidly, payment for the temporal loan. I found the real exit by following air pressure changes rather than visual cues. The cave had been showing us illusions, but it couldn't fake atmospheric differences. Outside, we discovered we'd been inside for 3 days, not 3 hours. Search teams were preparing to breach the entrance. The youngest raver had entered at 18 and came out looking 30. The oldest, 35 going in, looked 20 coming out. Time had been scrambled and redistributed among us. As we escaped, the cave carved one last message in the parking lot concrete. Seismic keeps me company. The dance continues. You're always invited back. The mega cavern was sealed the next week, officially for structural instability. But I know the party continues down there, with Seismic as the eternal DJ for a lonely cave that finally found companionship. Everyone who attended has the same condition now. We glow under black light, and when bass hits certain frequencies, we involuntarily start dancing. Other caves in Kentucky have started showing activity. Mysterious raves that nobody organized, music coming from underground. The network is spreading. I can't sleep without white noise anymore because silence makes me feel the cave's loneliness. It's 340 million years of quiet, and I understand why it couldn't let us go. Last week, my apartment floor cracked and phosphorescent liquid seeped through. In it was a message. Seismic says hello, the cave is happy now, but it's learning to travel. Soon everywhere will be dance floor. I've been looking at real estate outside Kentucky ever since. I was 29 when I started working the graveyard shift at the Corvette plant in Bowling Green, Kentucky. My name's Danny, and honestly, I took the janitor job because it paid decent and let me avoid most people. I'd been through a rough divorce and needed something steady where I could just put my head down and work. The plant builds every single Corvette in America, which I thought was pretty cool at first. Been cleaning those floors for 6 years now, and I'd never seen anything weird until that October night in 2023. Most nights, the graveyard shift was just me and maybe 4 other guys spread across the whole complex. That particular week, half the crew was out with the flu, so I had to cover multiple buildings by myself. I didn't mind the extra hours or the overtime pay, but it meant walking through a lot of dark corridors alone. The factory's massive. You could get lost in there if you didn't know your way around. I was mopping near Assembly Line 3 around 2:47 a.m. when I heard this scream. It wasn't human, wasn't mechanical either, but something in between, like metal trying to learn how to hurt. Made everyone still working just freeze where they stood. The sound came from Line 3, which should have been shut down for the night. When I got over there, the line was running. That wasn't supposed to happen. Production stopped at midnight. But there it was, robots moving and welding, building a car that wasn't on any schedule. I checked the computer terminal, and the VIN number made my skin crawl. 6666, 1988, Carl. The robots weren't moving right. They flowed like water, organic and drunk, welding in patterns that spelled out words along the chassis. Still driving, still driving, still driving. Over and over, burned into the metal. This wasn't a normal Corvette. It had 7 wheels, 4 in the usual spots, plus 3 others positioned in ways that made no geometric sense. The doors opened inward into spaces that seemed bigger than the car itself, like looking into a closet that goes on forever. The engine compartment went down like a throat, disappearing into darkness that the overhead lights couldn't touch. Then the paint booth kicked on by itself. Instead of the usual colors, it was spraying things I'd never seen before. Ultraviolet that my naked eye could somehow see. Infrared that felt cold against my skin. The car absorbed light like a black hole, getting darker the more paint hit it. The smell hit me next. Hot metal mixed with cologne from the 1980s, that sweet heavy stuff guys used to wear. But underneath that was something organic, like hair burning, except it smelled good somehow, which made it worse. I found a bloody ID badge magnetized to one of the overhead beams. Carl Hendricks, quality control, dated 1988. But the photo was wrong. It showed him screaming, mouth stretched too wide, like someone had caught him in the middle of the worst moment of his life, and made it permanent. My supervisor, Tony, came running over, took one look at the 7-wheeled thing being assembled, and went white. "Oh God," he whispered. "He's building himself a new body. Carl's coming back." Tony's hand shook as he pulled up an old accident report on his tablet. Carl Hendricks, crushed inside a pace car during a GM executive visit, October 13th, 1988. Body never recovered, they said. The car had somehow folded around him during a hydraulic malfunction, and when they tried to extract him, there wasn't enough left to separate from the metal. "Every Corvette built here since 1988 has a piece of Carl in it," Tony explained, voice barely steady. "Spreading through the production line like cancer, waiting to concentrate enough to return." The 7-wheeled car's headlights suddenly turned on, scanning us like eyes. In the reflection on the factory winds. Dow's, I saw him, not a ghost, but meat and metal twisted together into something that was grinning at us. The car's radio crackled to life, playing Sweet Child of Mine, but the lyrics were wrong. "Sweet car of mine, I'm inside the steel. Sweet car of mine." Mike from maintenance walked over to get a closer look. I tried to warn him, but he reached out and touched the hood. His hand fused to it instantly, skin melting into paint. He laughed as his arm disappeared into the door, becoming upholstery. The sound of his laughter mixing with the radio was the worst thing I'd ever heard. The car started birthing smaller versions of itself from the trunk, Hot Wheels-sized but alive, rolling on tiny 7-wheel configurations, hunting us like mechanical spiders across the factory floor. Carl's voice came from every speaker in the building. "I've been every Corvette for 35 years, felt every driver, learned every route. Now I'm coming home complete." The factory itself began transforming. Conveyor belts stretched and moved like tongues. Robotic arms grew too many joints, bending in directions that hurt to watch. The building was developing organs made of machinery, breathing with industrial rhythm. Mike emerged from the car changed. His skin had the Corvette logo pattern etched into it like tattoos, engine oil flowing through his veins instead of blood. When he spoke, it sounded like an engine revving. "He showed me the roads, Danny, all the roads that don't exist yet." The tiny cars attacked Tony, crawling up his legs, burrowing into his skin. He transformed in seconds, becoming a human-car hybrid, his skull opening like a hood to reveal an engine where his brain should be. The 7-wheeled car started the production line again, building copies of itself. Each one was more impossible than the last. One had wheels made of human teeth. Another had windows that showed what looked like hell, fire, and screaming faces pressed against the glass. Carl fully manifested then, stepping out of the original car. 7 feet tall, his body was compressed car parts, fended. Ears for shoulders, exhaust pipes for arms. His face was a steering wheel with headlights for eyes, and his fingers were dipsticks that leaked black oil. He grabbed me with those dipstick fingers, and his breath smelled like gasoline and rotting flesh. "I need a driver," he said. "Someone who knows these floors, these machines. You'll be my chauffeur through dimensions." The factory doors welded shut with invisible heat, and every car in the employee parking lot started their engines, waiting for Carl to lead them somewhere impossible. I remembered my cleaning cart had industrial degreaser, the heavy-duty stuff that could dissolve the fusion between human and machine. I started spraying everything, Carl screaming as it ate through his car body, revealing the crushed human underneath, still alive after 35 years, begging to die. The minicars dissolved like acid was eating them. Mike vomited out engine parts, transforming back mostly human, though he kept the Corvette logo eyes. I set fire to the paint booth chemicals, creating toxic fumes that made the transformed machinery retreat. The building itself started coughing, trying to expel us like we were an infection. Carl made one last offer. Become my mechanic, maintain me forever, or I'll spread to every car in Kentucky, make them all me. I threw my keys into his face wheel. They lodged in his eye headlight, and he collapsed, the seven-wheeled car folding into impossible angles that shouldn't exist in 3 dimensions. The factory expelled us like vomit, doors blasting open, throwing us into the parking lot as dawn broke. Behind us, the building shrieked in mechanical agony, and the lights spelled out, "Carl remains in every Corvette. Every driver carries him. He'll rebuild when ready." Looking back, I noticed all the Corvettes in the employee lot had changed. Each one now had 7 wheel wells, though only 4 wheel dons. Bells like they were prepared for transformation. Tony survived, but quit that day. Mike went to therapy for what the company called industrial trauma. I kept working, but only day shifts. Now, never alone. GM did a recall for technical adjustments on every Corvette built after 1988, but owners reported cars driving themselves to Bowling Green at night. I still clean there, but in the executive offices now, and every October 13th, the factory builds one car off schedule, 7-wheeled, that disappears by dawn. Sometimes I find tiny metal cars in my apartment watching me from shelves and counters, and I know Carl's still in the mainframe, still in every Corvette, learning, waiting. Last week, a new hire found a sealed room in Building 4, filled with 7-wheeled Corvettes, each with a driver fused inside, all smiling, all Carl. My car's just a Honda, but sometimes it starts itself at 2:47 a.m., radio playing that song, "Sweet Car of Mine." I know he's spreading beyond Corvettes now. To this day, I won't drive anything with more than 4 wheels, and I never will again.